When was a time when a gut instinct probably saved your life? Story 1. I volunteered as an EMT in a small village just outside NYC during my senior year of high school and my first few years of college. One night we were on call not only for our town, but also for the 2 surrounding villages, which were out of service. One of those villages wasn't exactly the safest neighborhood. Normally, we always had a police officer on every scene we responded to since they could usually get there faster. This time, however, in that bordering village, there was a fire on the other side of town and a crime investigation elsewhere, so PD resources were stretched thin. A call came in for a 25-year-old male with a facial wound at a private residence, with instructions that the patient was in the backyard. We were dispatched and told that no PD or advanced life support (ALS) units were available. It was just me and my driver. Note, this is standard in most agencies, but it felt very unnerving for me. When we got on scene, it was an apartment building with an open yard in the back that we could drive onto. My driver pulled into the field, and we saw the patient sitting in the shadows as if he was hiding. Something felt off, and that feeling prompted me to switch on the floodlights of the ambulance, illuminating most of the yard. The moment the lights came on, we saw 5 to 7 men with tire irons and baseball bats standing in what had been complete darkness. My driver threw it in reverse, and we got the hell out of there. I got on the radio and called for immediate assistance. It turned out those guys were planning to jump us, steal narcotics from the ambulance, and take the rig for a joyride. Pretty poor planning, really, because we don't carry narcotics on a basic life support ambulance. To this day, I fear what would have happened if we had just walked up to that patient. Story 2. Last summer, after I got out of the shower and climbed into bed, I had an overwhelming feeling that I should deadbolt the door. So I got up, walked the length of my house completely naked, and locked my side door. By the time I got back to the bedroom and turned off the lights, someone was at the door trying to kick it in. I called 911 and had a 3-minute response time, but the guy got away by running into the field behind my house and disappeared. The police on scene told me they suspected it was the same man who had broken into other houses in the area and had assaulted and raped an elderly woman only a few days earlier, so we bought a shotgun a few weeks later. Story 3. Years ago, I was walking home alone at night. Being the naive 15-year-old I wasn't worried about walking by myself so late. 2 guys were walking down the road toward me, talking to each other. They didn't look at me, say anything I heard, or make any movement that suggested they were anything more than 2 people on their way home. I reached the corner of my street, and they were just across the road, maybe 15 feet away. My street has a sidewalk on only one side, the side they were approaching. Suddenly, I had this awful sinking feeling in my stomach, and something told me to run. I didn't run because I immediately reasoned I was being crazy, but I did turn down the side of the street without a sidewalk and walked as quickly as I could. After a moment, I looked back. They had stopped at the corner, perhaps 20 feet away, and were clearly having a quick, intense conversation. My heart was pounding. I turned and kept walking fast, and when I looked back again, they had crossed the street and were following me. I live on a dead-end street. The only reason to be on it is if you live there, so I started running. Luckily, I have long legs and have always been a good sprinter. My house wasn't very far, and I was quickly in my driveway pulling out my keys. I opened the door and was stepping inside when I looked behind me again. They were standing at the end of my driveway. They looked at me, turned, and walked back the way they had come, perhaps assuming no teenager would live alone and that my parents would have heard me scream by then. I still shudder to think what might have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut and turned early instead of walking within arm's reach of them. Story 4. About 9 years ago, my engine died on the Florida Turnpike on my way to a family event. I was waiting for AAA when an older man with more nostrils than teeth pulled up in a dumpy, unmarked pickup offering to help. I got that funny, I'm in danger feeling, so I kept the windows up and the doors locked and told him AAA was on the way. He told me, through the window, that AAA wasn't coming and that he had been sent instead. He asked me to pop the hood, which I did while I redialed AAA to confirm. I was still going through prompts on the phone when he came back to my window and said there was blue stuff all over the engine and asked me to come out and take a look. I thanked him but said AAA was on the way and wished him a good day. All the while my hands were trembling and I felt as close to soiling myself as I have ever been. He lingered for a while before driving off. When I was finally connected to someone at AAA, They confirmed my tow hadn't been canceled and would be there soon. When AAA arrived, two things happened. The driver said, "Oh, you're hot," when I stepped out of my car, which made me uneasy, and I looked under the hood, and there was no blue stuff anywhere. To this day, I still remember peering at that scary old man's gums through my window and thinking I didn't want his mouth to be the last thing I ever saw. Story 5. A few years ago, a few guy friends and I took a guys-only vacation from our girlfriends and wives in Florida. We went down to the Keys and camped, snorkeled, went boating, all that touristy stuff. After almost a week of that, we got bored with the designated snorkeling areas and decided to find a less populated, more interesting spot. We ended up at some saltwater marshes in a national park and walked around the edges until we found a dilapidated, collapsing tower near the water, maybe an old lifeguard tower. No swimming signs were everywhere, but being a bunch of drunk guys, we decided to jump off the tower into the water. We jumped a few times and swam around a bit. After a while, everyone else wanted to stay in the marshes and explore, but I just didn't have a good feeling about how murky the water was and the fact that nobody else was around. In a way, I wanted to go too, but my gut told me not to. So after some arguing, I told them they could go ahead while I went back to the bar strip to party. For whatever reason, they decided that was a better idea, and we all left. A few days later, while leaving the campsite, we ran into a ranger and started talking about the marshes and how we had jumped in. Suddenly, he got intense, and his eyes went wide. Those marshes were off limits because they were absolutely infested with saltwater crocodiles and, to a lesser extent, sharks. It was actually a tourist destination because they were so commonly seen there. If we had swum out from shore, I don't know what would have happened. The water was so murky you could scarcely see a foot in front of your face, and there were 11 of us. I don't know that any of us would have been seriously hurt or killed, but I still wonder what might have happened. It's also one of the few times I didn't follow through with a sketchy plan, so I'm proud of that. Story 6. I was walking home from a restaurant with a carry-out box of food for family dinner when I was 13, and I noticed a black van up ahead. I lived in a fairly affluent area and was used to seeing similar vans from landscaping companies. But what stood out was that the windows were tinted and the hood had no logo. I didn't think much of it until I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was an old lady walking one of those Chinese crested terriers, the kind with almost no fur. "Hey, do you know where Bulrush Court is?" she asked. I pointed out the street and started to walk home, but when I looked back, the van was gone, even though I hadn't heard it leave. I actually just didn't want you going near that van. I felt uneasy seeing you walking home so late at night. "Girl," the lady called after me. I shrugged, thanked her, and we parted ways. Later, I found out that a van matching that description was being driven by a known sex offender. I owe that lady. I still live in the area, but I've never seen her or her dog again. Story 7. Back in September 2000, I was allowed to start kindergarten a year early. I was born on September 8th, 1995, just past the cutoff, but they made an exception because I already read at a second grade level. If my parents homeschooled me for it. My 5th birthday was coming up and my little brother was almost 5 months old. A few days before, my parents had given me one of my presents early, my very own digital clock, which I love because I was learning to tell time. That day, my mom needed to run across the street to help our elderly neighbor. She plopped my little brother into his high chair, told me she'd be back in 5 minutes. I excitedly nodded and left. I kept playing with my toys until I heard a loud crash and panicked, thinking my new clock had fallen. So I ran to the stairs to check my room. But something felt wrong, and I decided to look in the kitchen instead. I still remember the absolute horror when I saw what was happening. My little brother had been rocking his chair. It tipped backward, and it had landed on a small fence-like divider at the top of the drop into the family room and was slipping fast. Without thinking, I threw myself under the chair to keep it from falling further. It worked, but I ended up pinned against the ledge because I wasn't strong enough to push it back. I had no way to free myself, so I screamed bloody murder, hoping my mom would hear. She did. She came running, pulled the chair off me, and checked that we were okay. My brother was just shaken up, and after a while my back stopped hurting. Of all times, he decided that was the perfect moment to say his first word. Years later, I realized that if I hadn't looked in the kitchen and held the chair up, my brother could have been horribly injured. And I still have that damn clock I loved so much. Story 8. One morning shortly after graduating high school, I woke up and immediately called a friend to grab a coffee and go on a burn run. I hopped out of bed and headed for the shower, which was right across the hall from my bedroom. I was still living with my parents, and I was usually adamant about shutting and locking the bathroom door, but that day the house was empty, and although I thought about closing the door, something inside me told me to leave it open. Halfway through my shower, I started smelling burning plastic? Smoke? I jumped out, grabbed a towel, and walked out of the bathroom to find my bedroom engulfed in flames. The state fire investigators' report 2 months later said there wasn't enough evidence left in the room to officially declare a cause, but unofficially he told my parents he believed an electrical fire had started in the wall and spread incredibly fast through the room. He, along with many other firefighters since, told me that if the bathroom door hadn't been left open, the smell of the fire might not have reached me until it was too late. Story 9. Not my own life, but my mom's. A few years back, she had major dental surgery to get full denture implants. The process included pulling all her teeth, implanting titanium posts in her jawbone, stitching her gums, and clipping the dentures onto the posts. The dentist decided supergluing the denture onto her gums was a great idea. It wasn't, and it marked the start of my mom's quick health decline. The afternoon after the procedure, she was in so much pain, she was sobbing and clutching her jaw. I called the dentist, and he said it was perfectly normal, that the prescribed 800 milligrams of ibuprofen would kick in soon, and that she wouldn't remember it the next day because of the amnesiac pills he had given her before the procedure. The next day, she was still in incredible pain. The dentist told me to increase her dosage of ibuprofen from every 6 hours to every 4. As far as I know, the human body can't tolerate more than 3,200 milligrams of ibuprofen in a day without risking ulcers, especially if the stomach is mostly empty, which hers was, since she'd just had major dental surgery and couldn't chew. She had been eating mostly yogurt and mashed potatoes. I was 19 and didn't know any better, and she didn't protest because she was in so much pain. Fast forward 2 nights later. Her pain had lessened, but she looked pale. I brushed it off. Around 4 a.m., while I was awake on the internet, I heard something fall off a shelf. I thought it was just our dog knocking something over, but then I heard another sound, and my gut sank. Something wasn't right. I ran upstairs and found my mom on the toilet, back against the tank, head slumped, legs straight, eyes half open, pale as a sheet, whimpering faintly and unconscious. I ran to my parents' bedroom, woke my dad, and told him something was wrong with mom. He jumped up, rushed to the bathroom, and immediately told me to call 911 and the dentist while he got her decent and off the toilet. When he lifted her, we both saw the toilet full of blood. Dispatch sent an ambulance. The dentist just said, "Give her some water, she'll be fine." The ambulance took her to the ER while I rode in the front seat, crying. The high dosage of ibuprofen combined with her poor diet had caused a large ulcer that led to heavy internal bleeding. She lost about 5 pints of blood and almost bled out internally. She received multiple transfusions over the next 2 days along with medication to heal the ulcer. Thankfully, she recovered, but if I hadn't been awake that night, my mom might not have survived. Story 10. Not my life, but my brother's. He had a normal birth with no complications. He was the 3rd child, so my parents knew what they were doing. Everything seemed fine when they brought him home. He was a typical newborn, no signs of anything abnormal. One night, a few weeks later, my mom couldn't sleep. She said it felt like she'd dreamed something bad had happened, but she couldn't remember what. Just a lingering sense of worry that grew into fear and dread, though she had no idea why she was awake at that hour. As a parent, she instinctively connected that feeling to her children, and one thought hit her. One of them was being far too quiet for a newborn in the middle of the night. She went to check on my brother. He wasn't breathing. She panicked, screamed for my dad, and they rushed him to the ER. It turned out he had pneumonia that had completely blocked his airway. He survived, but has mild, permanent brain damage from the lack of oxygen. Not stupid, but there are things he simply can't grasp. He turns 22 this year because my mom woke up in the middle of the night with a bad feeling. Story 11. When I was around 11 or 12, I went out to a friend's house way out in the country. He said there was an abandoned farm about a mile away. So he, his roughly 8-year-old brother, and I went walking out there to see what we could find. The farmhouse sat on a hill where you could see the road for a ways. When we got up to it, we saw a white van coming down the road. As cliché as it sounds, we'd all heard the stories about white vans kidnapping kids. When it made the final turn toward the farmhouse, we panicked and ran inside to hide. Once we were in the house, thinking it was abandoned, we started hearing movement upstairs, then a laugh, a very sinister laugh, and the sound of a door slamming. At that point, we were practically shitting ourselves and bolted back outside. A Mexican guy in the van started yelling at us in Spanish and motioning for us to get in. Normally, we would have run, but some kind of sixth sense kicked in, and we could all see in his eyes that he seemed sincere, so we got in the van and took off. While we were driving away, I saw a guy burst out of the front door of the house with a fucked up shotgun who looked like he belonged in a GTA character cutscene. I started looking for anything to defend myself with in the van, but the guy just turned around and started talking to us in Spanish again. My friend is half Puerto Rican and knows a little Spanish, so he was able to tell the driver where we lived. The driver dropped us off at my friend's house and drove away. We sat there playing video games and telling his little sister what had happened, completely on edge. When his parents got home, we told them, and they had this look on their faces and said there were rumors of junkies squatting in that house. I don't know what the guy inside the house planned to do to us, or who the guy in the van was, or why he was even there, but I'll never forget the feeling of dread when we walked into the house. My mom always watches those true crime shows like 48 Hours, and I've always read about killers, so when I heard the noises in that house, I literally pictured a newspaper headline with my face on it and thought, oh my God, I'm going to become one of those kids who went missing and were never seen again. It sounds unrealistic, and my writing isn't great, but it really happened. The memory feels blurry and hazy, like it didn't even happen to me. And I'm not that old and usually remember things from when I was little really clearly. I've got a few other stories if anyone's interested. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.